In this video, we'll be looking at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Volume 1, including the letters from Walton to his sister, as well as chapters 1 through 3 of Victor's narrative. So to begin, it's important to sort of note the narrative structure of Mary Shelley's novel. There are actually sort of 3 parts to the narrative. Letter number 1, the novel starts with 4 letters written from the character of Walton, Robert Walton, who is an explorer who is on this journey to the North Pole. And his part of the narrative is basically, it's kind of a minor role, but it sets the stage for Victor Frankenstein to show up and provide his side of the story. But we have a frame story, which is just Robert Walton, meeting Victor while he's on this journey of discovery to the North Pole. So he's going to be taking a ship in an exploratory mission, and he's going to find Victor, who's at this point in the narrative is sort of on his last legs, sort of decrepit, ill, and near death. And he's going to pick him up on this boat. And Victor is going to tell his story, his side of the story, which makes up the inset part of Shelley's novel. So the first inset story is Victor's version of events. It gives a little bit of background information about his childhood, his upbringing, and all the events that lead up to the creation of his creature. The creature itself doesn't have a name. I know we often associate the creature, the monster, as named Frankenstein, but once you get into the book, you'll notice that there is no name for the creature and that Frankenstein is the name of the creator. So we have a kind of story within a story within a story. We also will get in Volume 2 of Shelley's narrative, the monster or creature side of the story and what it went through from its early creation all the way up to the point where it meets Victor again and confronts him. So we have almost like 3 parts to this narrative: Walton and his journey to the North Pole, his meeting of Victor. Then we have the inset story of Victor creating the monster. And then we'll also have the inset story of the monster side of what he went through from his creation onward. So we get this story within a story within a story of Shelley's novel. So let's start with the frame story, which begins as letter number 1. And you'll notice it says letter number 1 to Mrs. Saville, England. And it's written from, we'll learn, Robert Walton's point of view. So this is a letter written to his sister where he's describing his journey and what he's planning on doing. So we learn a little bit about Robert Walton, and he's kind of a minor character in the story, but he becomes a kind of foil, or he reflects a lot of the same sort of themes and ideas related to Victor Frankenstein, who is our protagonist. So we learned that Robert Walton is embarking on a voyage to the North Pole, and he wants to be the first person to explore this part of the world. He's curious, he's an explorer, he is fixated on achieving this goal that no human in the world has succeeded at doing yet. So he's really on this brink of discovery. and he wants to be the first man to, voyage to the North Pole. He wants the glory of succeeding. He wants the respect and the accolades that come with being a successful explorer. But he also has a sense of loneliness about him. He's on this solitary mission, and he longs for a friend. He's writing these letters to his sister, but while he's on this voyage, he feels very lonely, and it's somewhat of a solitary mission. So if you're looking at your text, you might note this is the Broadview anthology that I'm looking at on page 50. This is Walton saying his goal. So he says, I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with the sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. These are my entire... So Walton is on this solitary mission to the North Pole, and he wants to, again, take this voyage to the North Pole. He longs for a friend, and as it happens, he runs into Victor Frankenstein in the middle of this Arctic Ocean. So we get the first meeting, our first introduction to the character of Victor Frankenstein, who, as we discover, is in a very poor shape. So this is in letter number 4 to Walton's sister, and he describes seeing Victor, and this is page 58 if you're looking at the Broadview anthology. So he says, good God, Margaret, if you had seen the man who had thus capitulated for his safety, your surprise would have been boundless. His limbs were nearly frozen, and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I never saw a man in so wretched a condition. So he sees Victor, who had this, he was on a sledge drawn by dogs, so like a dog sled, and he's appearing to chase after this figure of a man of gigantic proportions. So Walton is watching this from the ship, and he sees Frankenstein on his last legs, so he invites him aboard the ship. And then he describes Victor further on. He says, I never saw a more interesting creature. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness and even madness. And there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness towards him or does any of the most trifling service, his whole countenance is lighted up as if it were a beam of benevolence and sweetness that I never saw equaled. But he is generally melancholy and despairing, and sometimes he gnashes his teeth as if impatient of the weight of woes that oppresses him. He wants to, we learn, so in that passage there, it's just the two sides of Victor. On one side, he's, kind and, compassionate individual who, is the generous friend to others. And then this other part of him is tormented in sadness and despair and anger. And he feels oppressed by what we'll find out is this creature that he created. Victor's mission, we learn, is to seek the one who fled from him. And he refers to the creature as the demon. So that's our first kind of introduction to Victor's monster or creature, who he refers to as the demon. And as the letters go on, Victor and Walton have or share a kind of friendship. They become almost kindred spirits, in the sense that they share similar values and goals. So at the end of the final letter from Walton, he remarks on what Victor is saying to him. So these are Victor's words, and he says to Walton, "You seek for knowledge and wisdom as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you as mine have been." So basically, Frankenstein acknowledges that he is similar to Walton in the fact that both men are seeking out knowledge and wisdom. They're both seeking out to do things that no other human has done before. They're facing dangerous territory, putting their lives on the line, and really going after their goal with a single-minded pursuit. And Victor acknowledges there, this is a bit of foreshadowing, but he's saying he's wishing Walton the best, but at the same time warning him that the serpent not sting you as he has been. So we know that something went wrong for Victor Frankenstein, and it's led him to this moment where he's basically on his deathbed, and he's going to confess or give his side of the story to Walton about what went wrong in his life. So that's basically the frame story is those letters that Walton has written to his sister, and we get the first glimpse of Victor Frankenstein as a man who is basically on his deathbed, who has endured great torture and sadness and is still focused on this pursuit of the demon. And we'll learn more about that as we get into the inset part of the story, which is Victor's own narrative of what happened to him and how he created the monster.